Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is the latest film in theaters, but is it the chilling experience we can all enjoy, or should we freeze up before deciding if it's worth our time? Welcome to Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema, and today we're talking about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the fifth film in an unconventional sort of franchise. Let me know down in the comments below if you've seen it. What do you think about it? Is it good or bad or somewhere in the middle? A new generation of Ghostbusters is coming into the streets of New York City once again, but once their business is starting to take on this subside and threaten to be taken down, they have to face this new threat that's starting to grow icier and colder throughout the streets. And beginning with the positive, this is a chilling experience that has some great, exciting moments just by the visuals alone. It looks good. The production value is well used. It doesn't look like the VFX is underutilized or incomplete. Just the visuals alone, the way they progress throughout the story is rather good for the meat of what you're expecting. If you're a fan of the original Ghostbusters or even Ghostbusters Afterlife, you may be having a good time with just what this film has to offer. The progression is a slower pace, but it also starts off rather quickly just with action. It doesn't have as much exposition in the sense of building up the team, having to bring up the team again, because with the past four films, including the 2016 one, you're going about creating this new way of reinventing the Ghostbusters, what they have to do, bringing the team back together for the threat. But this, for the most part, already has the team together fighting on the streets. It doesn't over explain how they get to New York City to start up again in New York City. And with this new generation, it has the same energy that Ghostbusters Afterlife has. And so in the common grounds, it does have a substantial amount of weight that weighs in on what this threat has. And the threat itself, it does have a looming experience that really heightens the tension of the story. How they deliver on that is a good threat, and what we see in the trailers is delivered quite well throughout the experience that you can have for this film. And it does have a few jokes that really made me laugh for what I was going for. I wasn't quite expecting how much comedy, and while the comedy is kind of set on the side in some ways compared to the original Ghostbusters, it still does play a part that feels common. So if you enjoy that aspects to the film, then you'll probably be enjoying this to a good means as well. But going into some of the mixed elements, there's some aspects to some of the characters where you're playing in the legacy characters once again, and some of the jokes or certain aspects to what they bring with the legacy could be a hit or miss for you on aspects of what they're bringing back, what they're referencing. Obviously, it's referencing the legacy, bringing the characters in, and sometimes that can take a little bit away with bringing in the new generation, progressing from that. And while they do have decent roles as the legacy characters, that actually works better because they're actually pulled in at the very beginning of the film. In some ways, they're kind of spread throughout, but generally they have their introduction earlier on than within Ghostbusters Afterlife, now that we know they're still kind of a part of the story. And so it still delivers on the aspects, but also can be a miss by certain references, by word usage, and certain dialogue that feels a little bit heavy-handed. It can work at sometimes, but not always. And going into some of the negatives, personally for me, comedy is not always a big driving factor for any film in general. It can be very hit or miss, and most of the time it was over heavy-ended, and not in the sense that the comedy was bad, but the comedy was misplaced in parts of the film where it broke some of the tension, where the film is going on an uphill grind. And then suddenly you get a joke where you're in the middle of a fight or at the biggest threat of the film, and there's a joke that interrupts what the villain is doing when it shouldn't necessarily have a character trait to stop in its tracks or do something that goes against what we're expecting for the villain of the story. It very much contrives the story to work its way up for characters to develop their time or develop certain skills, learn certain things that they need to just to defeat it. And so with that, some of the final battle is just built up from the very beginning to the very final battle in a way that doesn't feel as much like it delivers or has a great payoff at the end of the day, because certain characters, certain subplots where it's very convoluted with a lot more subplots than it may need to, it unfortunately gets subsided to where the tension of the story, it has certain moments where it works, but also still has the comedy that interrupts certain parts of the story where the natural dialogue doesn't feel like it flows as well, which is some of the ways that some previous films have done that. But in this case, it still interrupts what you're really expecting for how you're wanting a realistic approach or more dramatic approach. Certain subplots are there and they introduce new things and not always have the great payoff that you want them to. And there also is a certain villain from previous films that I'm not going to spoil that has an appearance, and I wasn't a fan of him in the first film, and so what they have to do pulling him back in, they don't give him any more character than he had, which was very minimal. And so it just doesn't offer that much more to what he has, to what I expect of the franchise, what I want from the franchise, that unfortunately brings this to be something that's not often my taste for the franchise as a whole. But for this film in particular, it still subsets what you really want for the aspects of the fun and the nature that this film brings, while it delivers on certain subplots, certain characters, the divide between what you're expecting and what it ultimately delivers on is somewhat underwhelming by the end of the day when you think of all the contrivances, certain characters, certain aspects that's built up into lore that kind of drives the story away from its own means just so it can write its way to the end of the story and still underwhelm on its great payoff. And so that's just my personal thoughts on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. If you're a fan of the previous films, I think you'll enjoy this one, at least for a good bit. But for me, I'm not a massive fan of a franchise, so unfortunately this film underwhelms. And so that's just my personal thoughts. That's a simply 4.0 out of 10. And that's just all. Make sure to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this review and want to see movie content each and every day, make sure to comment down below your thoughts. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.